Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over, the grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong, and once again, happy to be with you today. We got football to talk about. That's always a good day, right? It's always a good day to have football. Today will be about the 2025 football schedule that was just released this morning, so we'll jump into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert. Black Desert Resort isn't just your home. It's an endless retreat where life is played your way, from intimate studios to spacious four-bedroom suites. The raw beauty of southern Utah is your new backyard. Discover its championship golf course, exquisite dining, and world-class outdoor adventures, all yours to conquer. This is luxury your way. Learn more about owning a luxury residence at blackdesertresort.com. Come play, come stay. All right, as I mentioned, we'll talk college football. We'll talk Big 12. We'll talk Utah football schedules. So, today was the day. It's been the long-awaited day that we've all been kind of wondering when it was going to happen. We got some rumblings that it was going to be this week, and then the Big 12 announced that it would be today at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. So they did for the first time, they did a Big 12 schedule release show on ESPNU. They had some other platforms, ESPN Plus, and some other places that you could have watched it, but that was kind of your main broadcast channel. And I thought it was going to be a little bit different, quite honestly. Right as the show started, all of the schools and the conference released the schedules for everybody. So the show seemed kind of superfluous to what it was. But, it gets people to watch and kind of break it down in a little bit and do that. So, this is Brett Yormark trying to provide a little bit more juice to what the schedule is, trying to get people excited for it and kind of talk about it in that respect. So, you have to like that. But at the same time, it was something that was really easy to see on Twitter once that got put out there, and everybody moves on. So my story's out there. If you haven't seen it, you can go check it out and see the full schedule that way. But I'm going to break it down here and let you know everything that's happening. So let's dive into it. All right, so some early impressions of this schedule. And let me just read you the schedule. I don't expect you to understand it or comprehend it in the sense of like remembering every date, but I'm just going to read it. Just so it's there. So Utah starts off the season at UCLA on the road. Only the third time in 15 years that Utah started on the road. Obviously, you remember the Florida game. That was a big one. And so then you've got UCLA at the Rose Bowl. So that'll be a fun opportunity to go up against a former Pac-12 opponent. UCLA, really started to come along as it goes. And I'm going to break these down as we go, but a little bit. We'll get into them deeper as the year goes on. But so you have that. You return home for Cal Poly. Then you're back on the road in week 3 against Wyoming in Laramie. Interesting game. You start conference play with Texas Tech at home. This is an interesting team, and I'll get into that in a sec. You then go on the road to West Virginia, and then you have your first bye. So your first bye comes in week 6, and then after that you have 4 games with 3 of those at home. So you've got Arizona State at BYU, Colorado, and Cincinnati. So Colorado and Cincinnati are at home. The only road game is at BYU. So you've got that. And then you have your last bye. What is that week? You can't even see. Whatever that is. And then you've got at Baylor, Kansas State at home, and then at Kansas. So you end the year at Kansas. That game will be either Friday or Saturday. At least that's the designation right now. So it could be another one of those Black Friday games, or it could be Saturday. So we'll see how that goes. So that's the schedule right there. I'm going to break it down. Like I said, we'll kind of go over it a little bit. We'll go over this more once we've seen spring camps for all of these teams and kind of see where they're at, see where their weaknesses are, see where their strengths are. We still have kind of a good idea of where some teams are based on how they played last year, so we'll see how it goes. But early impressions right now. Those early impressions are there's no travel outside of Utah in October. That's a great advantage for Utah in the sense that they don't have to, the middle month of the season, you don't have to leave home. And yeah, you have to go to BYU, but that's hardly, that difficult. You're driving, 40, 50 miles south and you're staying in a hotel. These guys stay in hotels every single week, so it's not anything out of the world, but they're at home. They don't have to fly. They're on a bus. It's pretty easy travel. So October is going to be a great month for them. They get their first bye, October 4th, and then you've got, 3 games in the state of Utah. And then even in the first week of November, you're still at home before another bye. So really, from the time that Utah travels from September 27th against West Virginia, they don't travel out of state again until November 15th. That's a huge stretch, especially, if there's injuries or other things that way. That's a great opportunity for Utah to not have to be able to travel a ton. So you're obviously front-loading that with, your non-conference schedule with UCLA and Wyoming, but outside of that, you only have 4 other road games in conference play, and one of those is in your own state. So not really that difficult in terms of the road competition, at least in travel-wise, right? Other impressions are, I think this is a good bye schedule for Utah. It sets up well. Their first bye is in week 6. Then you have 4 games. Your second is in week 11. I did take a note of that. I just, for whatever reason, wasn't looking at it. So I do know what I'm doing. So, but you do get a good bye schedule, right? You want to be able to get a little bit of the season underway before you get that bye. Be able to have some games under your belt, kind of rest up a little bit, especially as you go into October, and then, get a few more games before getting a second bye. So I think, this is about as good as you can ask for. Looking at the bye schedules for a lot of these other teams, and I'll break some of that down a little bit as well. It's not as easy for some of these other teams. So, for example, one team has a bye in week 2, and some in week 3. They can be beneficial wherever, but it's not always easy. So I think Utah benefited that way. More things about the bye. Utah has 2 home games after a second bye, or after the second bye. Where am I looking at? I'm all confused on my schedule. Anyways, no, they have 2 home games before their second bye. So you get essentially to stay there. You have a bye, and then you're going to Baylor. That's a great opportunity for Utah, as I mentioned. So you've got that long travel period where you're staying in state. Everything goes well. Utah does get 2 opponents this week after their own byes. So you do get Arizona State and Colorado. Each will have a bye the week before. Utah then actually has another opponent with a bye, but they both share the same bye, and that's Baylor. So Baylor has a bye that same week. So I kind of counted that as a net loss, right? Or not loss, equal. We'll just say that. It's really struggling today. Anyways, it's something to take into consideration that Arizona State and Colorado will have a bye before they play Utah. But I think the schedule sets up decently. Utah also has no back-to-back road games. They do have back-to-back home games, but this year they don't have to face any back-to-back road games, which can be an advantage as well. So, this schedule really sets itself up well in terms of being able to give Utah the rest that they need, assuming that they can stay healthy and, be able to go on a run if they need to. There's 2 stretches here that, you could decide which one is the toughest, and it's easy today on February 4th to be able to say, oh, this one's going to be tougher than this one, but it's hard to know until you get into the season, and fortunately, both of these are going to come, after the bye. So you're going to get a few games into the season. You're going to see how these teams are before you really see how these stretches are going to be. But that first stretch, I would argue, is probably tougher, but you can convince me on the other one, is that after the Utah's first bye, you then have Arizona State at home, you then go to BYU, you then have Colorado at home, and then you get Cincy. Now, Cincy's not expected to be one of the top teams in the conference, but that can be a tough stretch. You're going against the reigning champions in ASU. BYU is always an emotional game, And then we really don't know what this Colorado team's going to be. Are they going to take, a step back, not having Shadir Sanders or Travis Hunter? What's it going to look like? That kind of stuff. I think that one, more so than even the last 2 years, is more questionable. So this stretch absolutely could be not as difficult. I mean, quite honestly, it's 3 home games. And then, like I said, the other ones on the road, it's emotional. That's always going to be a tough game. So you can make a case that it's actually not their toughest stretch, but based on the quality of opponents, you could see that it could be there. Now, the second stretch, and that's the one that close out the season, I think has potential to be tougher than the other one, just simply because 2 of the 3 are on the road, and all 3 of them should be in the upper echelon of the conference this year. So you start at Baylor. That comes after that bye week, as I mentioned. Then you come home against Kansas State, and then you go back on the road against Kansas. Now, all 3 of these teams, especially with how they finished in the season, should be trending in that direction where they could be, in the mix for a conference title. They could be some of the tougher teams. And so just the fact that you have 2 road games makes that a challenge, especially against, tough opponents. But the way that the schedule sets itself up, it has the advantage where if Utah's healthy and they're playing the football that, Utah hopes that they should be playing at that time of the year, that it trends well to be able to have that bye coming into that. And it trends well, especially to have Baylor coming off of bye. So it's not like one team suddenly has this momentum and you're sitting at home watching. This is now an opportunity where both teams are coming into it kind of cold, rested up, and, it can go both ways. So really curious to see how that goes. Honestly, those are my early impressions of it. Nothing too crazy. Like I said, it's a good schedule for Utah. They do have tougher opponents to some extent in the sense that you do have Kansas State and Kansas this year. You're also getting Arizona State, which is clearly on an upward trend. Texas Tech is much improved, so we'll see. So let's jump into each of these games and just kind of talk about them briefly. We're going to go short today on this podcast just so that you can have something but not get too crazy. But with this home schedule, so you do start at home against Cal Poly on September 6th. FCS game. You can expect what you want with that one. This is just a tune-up game essentially after you've already played UCLA. I'm curious to see if Utah puts a little bit more emphasis in that UCLA game, similar to what they did with Florida. I don't think it'll be as much. I don't think you're looking at them as kind of the same physicality that Florida was going to bring. But this UCLA team, they emphasize defense. They want to be able to kind of rough you up that way. So curious to see what this game will look like. But, I mean, the result is expected. So we'll move on for the other home games. So Arizona State, I'm going in this alphabetical order. So we're just going to go that way. Arizona State, reigning Big 12 champion. Obviously, there's a ton of momentum toward Arizona State. I would expect them to probably be the conference favorite, if not one of the top 3 teams in the preseason predictions. I just think, there hasn't been a lot lost there, and they're continually improving. Obviously, they have the momentum of being able to be the reigning champs. They do lose some pieces, and so there will still be questions. But you do have a tough Arizona State team. You do get them at home, which is an advantage, and Utah traditionally has played better at home, assuming that Utah is healthy. Last year obviously didn't bode well for Utah at home or away, so it really didn't matter where you were playing. You just didn't have a team. But if this, to be able to get Arizona State off of a bye, I think that is beneficial for Utah. It allows them to rest up and kind of be ready. The reality is even with Cam Rising, not really playing a great game at all in his final game as a Ute, they were still in the mix in that game on the road. So, Arizona State's a tough out, but at the same time, it's not. I still don't think they're as difficult as what they could be, right? And obviously, they picked up steam as the season developed and became a much different team. So. We'll see how that goes, but winnable game by all means, but it's not one of those games that you can just kind of gloss over anymore. Arizona State has definitely improved. They've done a tremendous work of being able to build and grow, and I think you're going to see a lot under Kenny Dillingham being able to have players excited about it, right? People are wanting to come there. They want to be able to compete at a high level. They have a coach that is similar to their age, and so it kind of gives them that same players coach mentality type stuff. And so, they could absolutely be a dangerous team. by week 7, when Utah plays them, you're going to be able to know a lot about both of these teams, and we'll be able to know. But I mean, that's October 11th. That's the first time you see them, or that's when you see them. So we'll see. Cincinnati. Cincinnati is expected to probably be near the bottom of the conference. They just haven't made the same improvements that other teams have. That's not to say that they can't make a jump, similar to kind of Arizona State did or BYU did. But I don't see, at least on paper, where that's the case, right? They haven't necessarily had an upward trend. Not to say that it can't be. I think they have some positivity within that program that could allow them to kind of break off a few and not be at the bottom. But this is a team that's still probably a year, maybe 2 away from being able to fully compete. I don't think they've kind of laid it out as well as some of these other teams, and so. I don't want to say that that's not a challenge, because any of these games are tough. But you do get Cincinnati at home. You get them that they play Baylor the week before, so potentially that could be a tough game where they have them at home, but then you're traveling across country to Utah. It's tough to decide how that's going to play out. But I mean, this is near the end of the season. We're going to know what these teams are like. Cincinnati, they're either going to exceed expectations, or they're just going to kind of be trying to play it out to the end and hope that they can finish strong. So that one, that's probably one of your easier games in conference. But once again, it's tough to fully know. Colorado, they're expected to be middle of the conference, right? I don't think anybody's expecting them to be at the top, especially since you don't really know what they're going to be, what their roster is going to look like. Obviously, a ton of transfers, a ton of talent. Deion Sanders is a great motivator and continues to do a lot of great things there. He's seemingly invested into the program, right? Obviously had an opportunity potentially to coach at the Dallas Cowboys or the Raiders or some other programs, and he's wanted to stay at Colorado. So potential to be a program builder there, be able to get guys that come in and want to be able to mature through the system, be able to play competitively in Boulder, and it's a good thing. So as much as, today in February, we don't know much about Colorado, this is still a tough game. It's at home. Even though Utah's been hampered the last few years, this has still been a tough challenge for Utah. They've improved on defense. They're getting better in the trenches outside of the offensive line. That hasn't been there. And if they can get an offensive line, then you have to like what they can do. But this is still a team that, honestly, it could go either way. They could be at the bottom of the conference. They could be near the top of the conference. I don't think they're quite to that upper echelon team where, they can win it all. But you never know. All it takes is be able to have a team gel together and have that unity, and things go well, like ASU or BYU or different things that way. So, definitely not out of that, but interesting nonetheless. You do get them the week after BYU, which there's always somewhat of a hangover, win or loss. And so that becomes the real challenge. How do you handle that? You do get them at home to start a 2-game home stretch. But at the same time, that's coming after BYU game. So interesting to see that one as well. Then Kansas State. You do get Kansas State in the penultimate, holy cow, game of the regular season. This is your last game, so it'll be senior night. Quarterback Avery Johnson's coming into town. He's obviously shown some abilities to be able to be really talented. He's also shown the ability to be able to get sped up and turn it over, as was the case when he played BYU this year in Provo. Excuse me. This is a team, once again, that is going to be near the top of the conference. People are going to have some expectations about Kansas State. They're going to be in the mix. And so this is going to be a tough challenge, right? It's going to be an emotional game. This is the game that Utah, always has their seniors go out, and it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. The benefit here is everything about this team by this point, and we'll know everything about Utah by this point as well. So there's not going to be any surprises in this game. I don't think this is one of those things where teams are going to catch Utah off guard regardless of where they play in the season, but you're going to know everything you need to know about Kansas State at that point in the season, right? Like, it's a little different than Texas Tech in week 4, where they're coming in. You've never really played them before. This is only the third time in the history of these two teams. But like non-conference play is tough to be able to see how a team really does, depending on what Texas Tech's schedule is like. Which just I'm side noting here, but they've got Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, and Oregon State. So it's not the murderer's row of non-conference schedules. It's actually you get an FCS team, you get a bottom of the FBS in Kent State. Unless they're making significant improvements, they're going to be at the bottom again. And then you get an Oregon State team that's they've been up and down. So that first game for Utah and Texas Tech, you're not really going to know a ton. So it's not like that. I completely took away the Kansas State to move to Texas Tech, but they're both at home, so we're going to stick with that kind of stuff. The one last note for Kansas State is they do get Oklahoma State the week before. I'm curious to see what Oklahoma State brings this year. Utah doesn't play them. But clearly they were in a world of disarray last year, worse than Utah. And so Mike Gundy had to renegotiate his contract or be let go. It's kind of a mess there, so we're curious to see what happens there. But like I said, I mean, you're getting them the second to last week of the season. You're going to know what Kansas State's all about and what you can do with them. And if Utah's in competition for something, if they're in the middle of the row, are they missing a bowl game again? We'll know a lot of these things. We'll see how that goes. So back to Texas Tech. This is one of those teams that's kind of really fascinating because they're projected likely to be in the middle of the conference. They haven't really been able to take that next step to be able to be considered one of the upper echelon teams of the conference, to be able to compete on a weekly basis with those teams. But it's a team that continues to do phenomenally well in the transfer portal. Now, some of that is obviously oil money and being able to be in Texas and stuff that way. This is a team that ranks number 3 according to 24/7 Sports in the transfer portal for this last year. So they're getting a ton of talent. They're beefing up the trenches, trying to improve that. This becomes a very fascinating team to be able to watch, right? And you would have to imagine that Utah has been tested enough with UCLA and Wyoming being those are road games that allows them to kind of have that focus. Even if you start 3-0 in non-conference play, you're still going to get Texas Tech's attention because this is the first game of the conference season. It's at home. First real opponent to come to Utah this year. No disrespect to Cal Poly, but it's an FCS school. Not to say that can't be a team that can do stuff, but this becomes your first power team to be able to come into Rice Eccles this year, and so the energy is going to be exciting. Really could be a fun game, but like I mentioned, you may not know as much about Texas Tech, so curious to see how that goes. Let's go to the away games. UCLA, as I mentioned, that you start the season off there, so you're going to get all the attention. This is going to be all that Utah focuses on from now until August 30th. They finished strong in the Big Ten, didn't exactly go as planned, but they made some strides at the end of the year where you could start to see that there's some upward momentum. Curious to see what those next steps are, kind of what's going on. We'll obviously develop more understanding of that after spring and kind of how things are going. But really fascinating game. I think the fact that you get to go to an environment where Utah's familiar with, that helps. I don't think there's going to be anything that changes for Utah and how they approach this game. It's not like you're traveling across country to go to Florida. I think this just becomes one of the easier types of environments to be able to go into. Now, then you go to Wyoming on September 13th. This one is one of those games where it was scheduled to be played in 2020 with the return trip to Utah in 2025. We're in 2025, and it's been renegotiated where they will still go to Wyoming first. So that's this year, and then you get a return trip. So Wyoming will play in Utah in 2027. But this is one of those old contracts that has existed for a long time. Chris Hill signed this one into existence, and he hasn't been the athletic director for quite a while. This is one where everybody wonders why they're still playing in Wyoming. A former conference foe. It's a tough environment, but you're getting this game in September. Laramie is going to be, not as difficult. I'm not going to say it's not a difficult environment, but it's not like you're playing this in November when it's frigid cold and, it's a world of hurt. This isn't going to be that crazy. The biggest change is going to be going from sea level at UCLA up into, 7,000 feet at Laramie. I can't remember exactly what it is. But Utah exists at high elevations, so it's not going to be the end of the world. But Wyoming, they had a struggling year last year. They finished near, I can't remember exactly where they finished in the Mountain West, maybe near the bottom, but it wasn't the team that they'd had in years past, where you go into Wyoming, go to Laramie, and you're in for a battle. That's not to say that you can't have that in Laramie this year, but it's not quite the same. So we'll see. Interesting opponent, but we'll see how that goes. Next, you got Baylor. Baylor really, they were kind of the quiet team in the Big 12 last year that kind of did well. They were the sneaky team that, a few things play the right way, and they're playing in the conference championship, and they're doing well. So, a team that's growing. Dave Aranda has done a good job with Baylor. Obviously has had some few down years, but it seems like he's found kind of some upward momentum. Baylor, I would imagine, to be one of the upper teams in the conference in terms of kind of how they're projected. Both of these teams have a bye going into this game. Utah gets to travel to Waco again. It won't be as crazy hot like it was 2 years ago when we had to travel in September and have 110-degree environment. This should be a much more pleasant experience to Waco. So this is in November. It'll be much nicer. So curious to see what this team does as well. Once again, you're going to know a lot about Baylor by this point, but this is a team that I think could make some noise in the conference this year. We'll see. Dave Aranda can be a really good coach, but he hasn't always been able to put the pieces together. So we'll see what happens there. BYU, obviously, this is the big game that Utah faces every single season. There's going to be a lot of emotions based on how this game panned out in Rice-Eccles Stadium. Now you're going to Provo, where that place is going to be rocking, especially if BYU is playing well like they have been the last year. It's going to be tough to be able to go into that environment and upset BYU. They're going to probably be, if not the favorite, they're going to be, in the top three probably. A lot of people are looking at them as a team that should have probably made the playoff, whether you agree with that or not. That's kind of the outside view of BYU and kind of how they were disrespected that way. This is a team that I mentioned. They played really well together. They worked together as a team and had a lot of consistency. The issue there now is you've got to do that, another year. Now that people are expecting more from you, can you live up to that? And as we saw with Utah, that's not always the easiest case, right? It's going to be the same case with Arizona State, some of these other teams. It's a challenge to be able to stay up at the top and get everybody's best. So if BYU is the conference favorite or they're near the favorite, you're going to get at least your team's best. You're always going to get Utah's best because Utah's going to come in there and it's an emotional game. It's in a hostile environment. It'll be a fun, electric environment. I hate that it's still in October. I don't know why they're not putting it at the end of the year, but it is what it is. BYU gets Arizona the week before on the road. Depending on how Arizona is this year, that could be either a really tough game or not as much. We'll see how that goes. But, interesting game, no less. Kansas. So that's your very last game of the season. They're expected to be at the top of the conference, near the top of the conference, even though they didn't have a great record last year. They finished strong. Obviously, there's a lot of optimism about this program and Jalen Daniels and being able to, what he was able to do, all that kind of stuff. They have Iowa State the week before, so that's a tough competition, especially if Iowa State's supposed to be competitive again. But it's the last game of the season. You'll know what you're playing for at this point. This game could be either really electric for two teams that maybe are competing for a spot in the Big 12 championship. It could be two teams in the middle of the conference. It could be two teams missing a bowl game again. It's hard to know, but I think you're going to get two teams that are going to be at a much better spot than they were this year. Two teams that are going to be able to fight and be ready that way. And then lastly, your final road game, which is actually your first road game in conference play, West Virginia. Once again, they let go of their coach. Things didn't go as well. They kind of stayed it by a year where things were able to be kind of picked up a little bit and moving on. But they let go of their coach, brought in Rich Rod back to Morgantown, who was a former head coach there years ago. Utah's absolutely familiar with Rich Rod and his time in the Pac-12. So there's familiarity there. They understand it. He's an exciting person to say the least, and will bring a lot of energy for that team. But I'm curious to see if West Virginia can put it together in his first year. Usually the coach, even in the transfer portal era, that first year is not easily able to put it together. So curious to see how that goes, kind of what that looks like and how that development is able to come together. But this is a team that is most likely going to be at the bottom of the conference. They're going to be projected there just based on the expectations there. They get Kansas the week before they play Utah, so that could be a tough challenge. Do they come into that with a loss? Do they come into that in a hard-fought battle? Do they come with a win? It's hard to know, but it's early enough in the season that Utah, they're not going to have a ton of information about them. You have to travel across the country. My unfortunate thing here is that it's not in October where those leaves and, the fall kind of environment of Morgantown is going to be at its peak. But it's still, it's still going to be a fun environment, and I think this will be a fun game. So this is the first time ever that these two teams have met in the regular season. They've played each other twice, but those two times have been in bowl games. So, that's kind of the nature of where it is. And Utah's won both of those games. So you got that. All right. So with that said, looking at your favorite road trips, BYU and UCLA have to be a given, right? BYU is the easy one that if you're going to go to an away game, it's easy to drive to Provo. So fans are going to be able to do that. UCLA, as we saw in the Pac-12, fans travel to those venues very well. LA is obviously a really easy venue to be able to travel to. Utah took over Pasadena a few years ago for their first Rose Bowl experience, and then a little bit the second year. But those feel like the given. Outside of that, what are your best road trips? Like, are you planning any of these? Are you going to Wyoming because that's close? Baylor, you can go get some Texas barbecue in November. Who doesn't love that? Kansas, last game of the season on the week of Thanksgiving. Do you make it a holiday break? Not that Kansas, I'm assuming, is probably a place that is your first item of business for a Thanksgiving trip. I would probably go to Hawaii personally, but I'll be in Kansas. Maybe you go catch a Chiefs game. I don't know. Maybe you want to see the Chiefs fall. I don't know what that is. But you do get a new stadium with Kansas, so there's that. Or is it West Virginia? Late September, so it's not as good as in October, but it's a new environment, a true college town environment. What are those there? So I'd be curious to hear what your road destination trip would be. Curious to see kind of where people are leaning. I've gotten a lot already on Twitter as I've put this on Twitter with Wyoming, West Virginia. Some have said Kansas. Baylor hasn't really been in the mix. Even last time, granted this was in, the dead heat of, September that Utah played Baylor. They still probably outnumbered the Baylor fans if we're being honest. So still travel well, but, interesting no less. Lastly, we're just going to follow kind of some of the other teams and kind of some of the stretches that they have. Arizona State has arguably the toughest stretch. It's tough to really kind of see what this is, but and even then, I don't know if it's the toughest stretch, right? Like looking at this, it's hard to know if this is it. Anyways, the note on Arizona State, as your reigning champ, their toughest stretch, we'll call it, is at Utah after a bye week. Then they have to play Texas Tech at home, Houston at home, and then they go on the road to Iowa State. Not exactly the toughest schedule, right? It's not like it's these 4 top contending teams in the conference, but it can still be a challenge. But curious to see kind of how theirs develops. Their schedule lays up exactly the same way as Utah's in terms of the bye weeks. And so they're going to have a great opportunity at their disposal to be able to get back to the Big 12 championship game. So nothing out of the world. They do play at Mississippi State this year. Curious to see what Mississippi State looks like. Texas State is another non-conference game that's a tough one. But by and large, their schedule lays up fairly well. It's not that difficult. That is honestly just their toughest stretch of that schedule. Another team, BYU, they have a 6-game stretch between bye weeks. Their first bye week is actually in week 3. Wow, I read that wrong. Sorry. Week 3, and then they have a 6-game stretch. So it's a little, you get a long stretch there before a bye in week 10. Whereas Utah's easiest stretch is probably in October in the sense that they don't have to really travel. BYU has their toughest stretch in October. So October will be tough for BYU, where they have West Virginia at home on a Friday night. They go to Arizona, then Utah's at home, and then at Iowa State. It's once again, this isn't Murderer's Row, but this is a tough challenge in the sense that depending on how all 4 of those teams fare this season, it can be tough, especially you go to Arizona, never really know what's going to happen in the desert. Then you have an emotional game against Utah at home, and then you have to go on the road to face another team that's, top of the conference in Iowa State. So there's that. Colorado, they go the longest without a bye this year. So they go all the way to week 8 before they get their first bye, and then 4 weeks later to get their second bye. So, that could be tough for them, or it can be great in terms of momentum that allows them to be able to move forward and do that. Baylor and West Virginia have the second longest without a bye, so they go till week 7. So you've got 6 games before Colorado, 7 games before a bye. But Colorado finishes the season with Arizona State and on the road at Kansas State. So it could be a tough stretch, right? Those byes, I don't know how well they can serve you, but if things go wrong in that first 7-game stretch, it becomes a challenge, and then you end the season with 2 teams that should be at the top of the conference. So curious to see there. Iowa State and Kansas State have a week 0 conference game on a neutral site. They both get 3 byes this year, so you'll see that. Nothing really to take away from either one of those teams in regard to that. Their schedules lay up pretty similarly. Iowa State gets 2 home games with BYU and Arizona State back-to-back. That could be a difficult stretch, and then have to travel to TCU. Kansas State, their schedule, the way the bye works, they play no longer than 3 games before a bye throughout the entire season. Well, at the beginning of the season, you have 4 straight games because you got that week 0, and then you get a bye. But everything else lays out well. You go 4 games bye, 3 games bye, 2 games bye, and then 3 games. So it sets up well for them. And then lastly, my only other team takeaway is with kind of the long stretches for some of these teams. TCU has a week 2 bye, and then they have 7 straight games. Oklahoma State with also 7 straight games after a week 3 bye. Houston with a similar 7 straight games after a week 4 bye, and then Texas Tech with 7 straight games after a week 5 bye. So that's kind of the longest for those teams, outside of, like I said, Colorado, who has to do those first. That's kind of it. So by and large, the schedule around the conference lays up fairly evenly. I don't think there's one team that necessarily has a huge, distinct advantage, but it is something that is pretty equal. Like I said, Utah has a great travel schedule where they travel on September 27th, and then don't have to travel outside of the state until November 15th. That's a great opportunity for them. So good schedule. We'll break these down a lot more and how these go and kind of what goes on there. Outside of that, looking at football this week, tomorrow is National Signing Day, which will be silent for Utah. To my understanding, barring some last-minute changes, I don't expect them to sign anybody. That's not to say that it couldn't happen, but I don't expect anything to happen there. Right now, they're ranked numbers 38 in 24/7 Sports composite rankings for the year, so not bad at all. We'll see how that goes, but for the most part, Utah's fully focused on the 2025 season. They've got some of these freshmen already in, ready for spring. They've got the transfer portal people in here. You won't get a lot of that stuff until after that. So really curious to see how things go, but tomorrow will be pretty quiet for Utah. It's all business through spring camp, which will be coming up soon. So with that, we're gonna call it a day. We're gonna make this one short being 37 minutes compared to my last few that have been an hour. But like I said, we'll break the schedule down as the season goes or the year goes, and look at kind of what each team has. So it'll be a much deeper dive into that. But thanks for listening. I appreciate it. I hope you all have a great day, and we will chat later.